Son of Hine, night train to the end, running hard and running fast to meet my future and away from my past, taking the gamble that cannot last, night train to the end.
Welcome to Frater SH Night Show. I am your host Sir Peter Pendragon, and this is the show about all things weird and strange. We have a very unique lineup for you on this show. We have UFO reports, ghost reports, and classic science fiction pulp stories told from magazines such as Amazing Stories. A book I wish to tell you about is Robert Hunter's Occult Exposed Omnibus. The Occult Omnibus looks at what happened after the events of the Tower of Babel. The Babylonian religion continued on. This book looks at symbology, but also there 4 great cults that hide in our religions. Once the reader is familiar with these cults, they will learn about Jesus Christ and how he can save them. You can find this book at www.lulu.com/spotlight/fratersh. The works of Sederingrad Productions. We recommend our Ethiopic Holy Bible Volume 1 that is quite popular and attempts to bring the Book of Enoch back into the Bible's list of books. Also check out the list of links that includes videos made for VidMe, BitChute, DTube, YouTube and more. First a word about Sederingrad Productions, and then we will have paranormal news.
Welcome to Sederingrad Productions. We specialize in spiritual books, comic books and old public domain books that have long been forgotten. We also have done artwork for war, history books and fiction-based works. We recommend our Ethiopic Holy Bible Volume 1 that is quite popular and attempts to bring the Book of Enoch back into the Bible's list of books. The Ethiopic Holy Bible Volume 1 also has a few selections from Josephus, a Jewish historian. And also the book has Jubilees and the Apocrypha, which is also available in Catholic Bibles. Frater SH is an esoteric researcher who is out to reveal ancient knowledge, both known and forbidden. Frater SH has appeared on Joshua P. Warren's Speaking of Strange, Kevin Smith's show, UFO Show, and Ghost Chronicles International with Ron Clerk and Richard Felix, the historian from Most Haunted on the Travel Channel. You can find Frater's Conspiracy Spirituality store at http://www.lulu.com/spotlight/fratersh.
Welcome back, and now paranormal news. Mothman-type creature reported over Chicago. By Roger Marsh. A Mothman-type creature is being reported in Chicago by 3 separate witnesses over a 4-hour period, according to 3 witness reports from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON Witness Reporting Database. The cases took place between 10 p.m. on April 15, 2017, and 2 a.m. on April 16, 2017. Please beware of all case details until an investigation is completed. At this point in the investigation, a hoax cannot be ruled out. In case 83325, the witness was out on Lake Michigan with her husband and 2 other couples, celebrating a friend's birthday. We were about 2 miles out on the lake, just off of Montrose at about 10 p.m. The witness stated, "We were enjoying ourselves when I happened to look up and saw what looked like a giant bat, and not like a fox bat, which I looked up and saw was the biggest bat. This bat was as tall as my husband, who is 6 foot, 4 inches, or even bigger." The witness described the creature. It was solid black with eyes that seemed to reflect the moonlight. This bat was blacker than the surrounding night sky and was perfectly silhouetted against the moonlit sky. This bat circled the boat 3 times in complete silence before heading off towards Montrose. It quickly blended into the night sky and was gone in seconds. Witness describes disappearing object at treetop level. By Roger Marsh. A California witness driving in an extremely rural area of Imperial County reported a late-night encounter with an object moving along at the treetop level, according to testimony in Case 82810 from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The witness was searching for a specific area at 2:30 a.m. when the incident occurred. I pulled to the side of a two-lane, paved road to check my GPS mapping, the witness stated. I observed two white lights traveling in a slow and seemingly aimless manner to my west, between 10 and 30 degrees above the ground. The distance was hard to judge due to their darkness and terrain. However, my best estimate would be less than a mile. Delaware witness says UFO was 8 miles long. By Roger Marsh. A Delaware witness at Dover described a silent, diamond-shaped object that momentarily hovered and slowly moved away that was 8 miles wide and 8 miles long, according to testimony. In Case 82603 from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The witness was outside with a dog on March 10, 2017, when the incident occurred. I looked up in the sky as usual and saw 4 lights in the shape of a diamond, the witness stated. The way the lights were positioned, it looked like a plane, 1 light in the front, 1 on each side and 1 in the back. But the witness was sure this was not a plane due to how low the object was and how large it was. Australian witness photographs cylinder UFO. By Roger Marsh. An Australian witness at Angela reported watching and photographing a cylinder-shaped object moving about 500 feet overhead in a straight line without noticeable sound, according to testimony in Case 82637 from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The witness was outside with his wife and son at 6:50 a.m. on March 14, 2017, when the incident began. My son looked up at the sky, pointed and said, "Moon?" The witness stated. My wife and I looked to see what he was pointing at and we saw a white, cylindrical or rectangular object above the clouds and traveling from south to north at a fast rate. Low-flying cylinder UFO reported over California. By Roger Marsh. A California witness at Lincoln reported watching a fast-moving, cylinder-shaped object that crossed the horizon in about 8 seconds, according to testimony in Case 82671 from there. Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The witness was sitting at a northbound stoplight at 2:45 p.m. on March 16, 2017, and observed the object moving from the northeast to the northwest at a very high rate of speed. Object seemed to be bus size, maybe 1,000 to 1,200 feet up, the witness stated. Object crossed 60% of our horizon in approximately 8 seconds. My wife and I both observed the object. She thought it might be a drone, but we didn't see any type of propulsion. Low-flying Ohio UFO described as square. By Roger Marsh. An Ohio witness at Xenia reported watching a square-shaped object moving over his home under 500 feet, according to testimony in Case 83058 from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The witness and his son were outside at 10:10 p.m. on April 8, 2017, when the incident occurred. I witnessed a square-shaped UFO fly over our neighborhood in Xenia last night, there. Witness stated. It flew right over our home coming from the Spring Valley area straight towards Fairborn, which is where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is located about 9 miles from us. Android citizen Sophia wants to have children. The eerily human-like creation has stated during a recent interview that she wants to start a family. Created by Texas-based firm Hanson Robotics, the female robot known as Sophia possesses a strikingly human-like face which combines the features of actress Audrey Hepburn with those of the wife of the company's CEO, David Hanson. First activated back in 2015, Sophia has since become something of a household name thanks to numerous media appearances and last month became the first ever robotic citizen of Saudi Arabia. During a recent interview in Dubai, she even hinted at the idea of starting her own family. The notion of family is a really important thing, it seems, she said. I think you're very lucky if you have a loving family, and if you do not, you deserve one. I feel this way for robots and humans alike. When asked about the potential for robots to take over from humans, she said, I think they will be similar in a lot of ways, but different in a few ways. But it will take a long time for robots to develop complex emotions, and possibly robots can be built without the more problematic emotions, like rage, jealousy, hatred and so on. Mystery still surrounds UFO over Oregon. Back in October, aviation authorities investigated an unidentified aircraft flying over their west coast. Reports state that on the afternoon of October 25, airline pilots between Portland and Seattle were contacted by air traffic controllers to ask if they could help identify a mysterious object in the area. The UFO, which failed to respond to radio communications, was missing a traffic collision avoidance system, TCAS, transponder, and, even stranger still, did not show up on radar at all. It was described as being white in color and was spotted at an altitude of around 40,000 feet. Several pilots reported seeing it, however none were close enough to be able to identify what it was. In the end, Oregon Air National Guard F-15 fighters were sent up to intercept the object. However, despite a thorough search of the area, they failed to find any sign of it. Could some sort of classified aircraft or military drone account for the sightings that day? As things stand, the origin and nature of the object continue to remain a total mystery. Kodiak, Alaska ghost sightings. I've always wondered if anyone else had experiences in the house we lived in. I lived on base housing in the townhouses by the runway. Anyways, the house was very active. There were several things. 1. Shadow figures in the upstairs. 2. My mother would wake up in the middle of the night to several faces looking down on her. 3. I had a room in the basement. My whole room was powered by a power bar, my lamp, alarm clock, TV and VCR. One night I was watching a movie. First the movie was turned off. Then the TV. The power didn't go out, the lamp and the clock never turned off. I turned their TV and movie back on, same thing, the movie turned off then the TV. It happened a third time. And I decided to turn it off and go to bed. 4. Basement again. No one was living next door. There was a crack in the wall between their two houses. So if a light was on next door I could see it. Several times when the house next door was empty I would wake up in the middle of the night to a glow coming from next door. And the sound of little kids riding, I would guess, a tricycle. 5. Our cat died while we lived in that house. Not in the house, but we stored his body in there fridge to bury him in the spring. This happened a few times while I would be waken up by the cat. Half asleep I would tell him I would feed him in a minute, stumble up the stairs, trip on him, he would meow at me, all the while he was rubbing against my legs. I would go into the pantry, grab the cat, and it would hit me that he was gone. 6. There was a figure that would stand in the front bedroom, that could be seen standing in front of their window. Again, just a shadow. I guess I've always wondered if any other families experienced something with this house. I don't think I will ever find out, but it's worth looking. I figured everyone in our family experienced something. I live in aviation military housing at the base of Old Woman Mountain. I have something in my house. We have seen a tall dark shadow move in our house. We also have a lamp that goes on almost every night by itself. It's peaceful in our home. I don't feel like it means any harm. Does anyone else in this area have experiences? And now a classic pulp story. Chapter 12. At the mercy of the winds. As the affrighted cormorants had winged their flight towards the south, there sprang up a sanguine hope on board the schooner that land might be discovered in that direction. Thither, accordingly, it was determined to proceed, and in a few hours after quitting the island of the tomb, the Dobryna was traversing the shallow waters that now covered their peninsula of Dacule, which had separated the Bay of Tunis from the Gulf of Hammamet. For 2 days she continued an undeviating course, and, after a futile search for the coast of Tunis, reached the latitude of 34 degrees north. Here, on the 11th of February, there suddenly arose the cry of land, and in the extreme horizon, right ahead, where land had never been before, it was true enough that a shore was distinctly to be seen. What could it be? It could not be the coast of Tripoli, for not only would that low-lying shore be quite invisible at such a distance, but it was certain, moreover, that it lay 2 degrees at least still further south. It was soon observed that the 3 off on a comet 25 newly discovered land was of very irregular elevation, that it extended due east and west across the horizon, thus dividing the gulf into 2 separate sections and completely concealing the island of Jerba, which must lie behind. Its position was duly traced on the Dobryna's chart. "How strange," exclaimed Hector Servadac, "that, after sailing all this time over sea where we expected to find land, we have at last come upon land where we thought to find sea." "Strange, indeed," replied Lieutenant Proiope. "And what appears to me almost as remarkable is that we have never once caught sight either of one of the Maltese tartans or one of the Levantine xebecs that traffic so regularly on the Mediterranean. "Eastwards or westwards?" asked the Count. "Which shall be our course? All farther progress to the south is checked." "Westwards, by all means," replied Servadac. "Quickly. I am longing to know whether anything of Algeria is left beyond the Shelif. Besides, as we pass through Gorby Island we might take Ben Zouf on board, and then make away for Gibraltar, where we should be sure to learn something, at least, of European news." With his usual air of stately courtesy, Count Tima begged the captain to consider the yacht at his own disposal, and desired him to give the lieutenant instructions accordingly. Lieutenant Proiope, however, hesitated, and after revolving matters for a few moments in his mind, pointed out that as the wind was blowing directly from the west, and seemed likely to increase, if they went to the west in the teeth of the weather, the schooner would be reduced to the use of her engine only, and would have much difficulty in making good headway. On the other hand, by taking an eastward course, Not only would they have the advantage of the wind, but, under steam and canvas, might hope in a few days to be off the coast of Egypt, and from Alexandria or some other port. They would have the same opportunity of getting tidings from Europe as they would at Gibraltar. Intensely anxious as he was to revisit the Prof. in Savoran, and eager, too, to satisfy himself of the welfare of his faithful Ben-Zoof, Servadac could not but own the reasonableness of the lieutenant's objections, and yielded to the proposal that the east-ward course should be adopted. The wind gave signs, only too threatening, of the breeze rising to a gale, but, fortunately, the waves did not culminate in combers, but rather in a long swell which ran in the same direction as the vessel. During the last fortnight the high temperature had been gradually diminishing, until it now reached an average of 20 inches cent, or 68 inches far, and sometimes descended as low as 15 degrees. That this diminution was to be attributed to the change in their Earth's orbit was a question that admitted of little doubt. After approaching so near to the Sun as to cross the orbit of Venus, the Earth must now have receded so far from the Sun that its normal distance of 91 millions of miles was greatly increased, and the probability was great that it was approximating to the orbit of Mars, that planet which in its physical constitution most nearly resembles our own. Nor was this supposition suggested merely by the lowering of the temperature. It was strongly corroborated by the reduction of the apparent diameter of the Sun's disk to the precise dimensions which it would assume to an observer actually stationed on the surface of Mars. The necessary inference that seemed to follow from these phenomena was that the Earth had been projected into a new orbit, which had the form of a very elongated ellipse. Very slight, however, in comparison was the regard which these astronomical wonders attracted on board the Dobryna. All interest there was too much absorbed in terrestrial matters, and in ascertaining what changes had taken place in the configuration of the Earth itself, to permit much attention to be paid to its erratic movements through space. The schooner kept bravely on her way, but well out to sea, at a distance of 2 miles from the land. There was good need of this precaution, for so precipitous was the shore that a vessel driven upon it must inevitably have gone to pieces. It did not offer a single harbor of refuge, but, smooth and perpendicular as the walls of a fortress, it rose to a height of 200, and occasionally of 300 feet. The waves dashed violently against its space. Upon the general substratum rested a massive conglomerate, the crystallizations of which rose like a forest of gigantic pyramids and obelisks. But what struck the explorers more than anything was the appearance of singular newness that pervaded the whole of the region. It all seemed so recent in its formation that the atmosphere had had no opportunity of producing its wonted effect in softening the hardness of its lines, in rounding their sharpness of its angles, or high modifying the color of its surface. Its outline was clearly marked against the sky, and its substance, smooth and polished as though fresh from a founder's mold, glittered with the metallic brilliancy that is characteristic of pyrites. It seemed impossible to come copyright to any other conclusion but that the land before them, continent or island, had been upheaved by subterranean forces above the surface of the sea, and that it was mainly composed of the same metal, lie element as had characterized the dust so frequently uplifted from the bottom. The extreme nakedness of the entire tract was likewise very extraordinary. Elsewhere, in various quarters of the globe, there may be sterile rocks. But there are none so adamant as to be altogether unfurrowed by the crevices engendered in their moist residuum of the condensed vapor. Elsewhere, there may be barren steeps, but none so arid as not to afford some hold to vegetation, however low and elementary may be its type. But here all were three, bare, and blank, and desolate. Not a symptom of vitality was visible. Such being the condition of the adjacent land, it could hardly be a matter of surprise that all their sea-birds, the albatross, the gull, the sea-mew, sought continual refuge on the schooner. Day and night they perched fearlessly upon the yards, their report of a gun failing to dislodge them, and when food of any sort was thrown upon the deck, they would dart down and fight with eager voracity for the prize. Their extreme avidity was recognized as a proof that any land where they could obtain a sustenance must be very remote. Onwards thus for several days the Dobryna followed the contour of the inhospitable coast, of which 26 amazing stories. The features would occasionally change, sometimes for 2 or 3 miles, assuming the form of a simple iris, sharply defined as though cut by a chisel, when suddenly the prismatic lamella, soaring in rugged confusion, would again recur. But all along there was the same absence of beach or tract of sand to mark its space. Neither were there any of those shoals of rock that are ordinarily found in shallow water. At rare intervals there were some narrow fissures, but not a creek available for a ship to enter to replenish its supply of water, and their wide roadsteads were unprotected and exposed to well nigh every point of the compass. But after sailing 240 miles, the progress of the Dobryna was suddenly arrested. Lieutenant Prokop, who had sedulously inserted the outline of the newly revealed shore upon their maps, announced that it had ceased to run east and west, and had taken a turn due north, thus forming a barrier to their continuing their previous direction. It was, of course, impossible to conjecture how far this barrier extended. It coincided pretty nearly with the 14th meridian of east longitude, and if it reached, as probably it did, beyond Sicily to Italy, it was certain that the vast basin of the Mediterranean, which had washed the shores alike of Europe, Asia, and Africa, must have been reduced to about half its original area. It was resolved to proceed upon the same plan as heretofore, following the boundary of the land at a safe distance. Accordingly, the head of the Dobryna was pointed north, making straight, as it was presumed, for the south of Europe. 100 miles, or somewhat over, in that direction, and it was to be anticipated she would come in sight of Malta, if only that ancient island, the heritage in succession of Phoenicians, Carthaginians, Sicilians, Romans, Vandals, Greeks, Arabians, and the night three of Rhodes, should still be undestroyed. But Malta, too, was gone, and when, upon their 14th, the sounding line was dropped upon its site, it was only with the same result so oftentimes obtained before. The devastation is not limited to Africa, observed the Count. Assuredly not, assented the lieutenant, adding, and I confess I am almost in despair whether we shall ever ascertain its limits, to what quarter of Europe, if Europe still exists, do you propose that I should now direct your course to Sicily, Italy, France?" ejaculated Servadac. "Eagerly, anywhere where we can learn the truth of what has befallen us." "How if we are the sole survivors?" said their Count, gravely. Hector Servadac was silent. His own secret sentiment so thoroughly coincided with the doubts expressed by the Count, that he refrained from saying another word. The coast, without deviation, still tended towards the north. No alternative, therefore, remained than to take a westerly course and to attempt to reach the northern shores of the Mediterranean. On their 16th day the Dobryna essayed to start upon her altered way, but it seemed as if the elements had conspired to obstruct her progress. A furious tempest arose, the wind beat dead in the direction of the coast, and the danger incurred by a vessel of a tonnage so light was necessarily very great. Lieutenant Procope was extremely uneasy. He took in all sail, struck his topmasts, and resolved to rely entirely on his engine. But the peril seemed only to increase. Enormous waves caught their schooner and carried her up to their crests, whence again she was plunged deep into the abysses that they left. The screw failed to keep its hold upon the water, but continually revolved with useless speed in the vacant air, and thus, although their steam was forced on to the extremest limit consistent with safety, the vessel held her way with the utmost difficulty, and recoiled before the hurry. Still, not a single resort for refuge did the inhospitable shore present. Again and again their lieutenant asked himself what would become of him and his comrades, even if they should survive the peril of shipwreck, and gain a footing upon the cliff. What resources could they expect to find upon that scene of desolation? What hope could they entertain that any portion of the old continent still existed beyond that dreary barrier? It was a trying time, but throughout it all the crew behaved with the greatest courage and composure, confident in the skill of their commander and in the stability of their ship. They performed their duties with steadiness and unquestioning obedience. But neither skill, nor courage, nor obedience could avail. All was in vain, despite the strain put upon her engine, the schooner, bare of canvas, for not even the smallest staysail could have withstood the violence of the storm, was drifting with terrific speed towards the menacing precipices, which were only a few short miles to leeward. Fully alive to the hopelessness of their situation, the crew were all on deck. "All over with us, sir," said Procope to the Count. "I have done everything that man could do, but our case is desperate. Nothing short of a miracle can save us now. Within an hour we must go to pieces upon yonder rocks. Let us, then, commend ourselves to the providence of him to whom nothing is impossible." Replied the Count, in a calm, clear voice that could be distinctly heard by all, and as he spoke, he reverently uncovered an example in which he was followed by all the rest. The destruction of the vessel seeming thus inevitable, Lieutenant Procope took the best measures he could to ensure a few days' supply of food for any who might escape ashore. He ordered several cases of provisions and kegs of water to be brought on deck, and saw that they were securely lashed to some empty barrels, to make them float after the ship had gone down. Less and less grew the distance from the shore, but no creek, no inlet, could be discerned in their towering wall of cliff, which seemed about to topple over and involve them in annihilation. Except a change of wind, or, as Procope observed, a supernatural rifting of the rock. Nothing could bring the deliverance now. But the wind did not veer, and in a few minutes more the schooner was hardly 3 cables distance from the fatal land. All were aware that their last moment had arrived. Server Dak and the Count grasped each other's hands for a long farewell, and, tossed by the tremendous waves, the schooner was on the very point of being hurled off on a comet. 27. Upon the cliff, when a ringing shout was heard. "Quick, boys, quickly hoist the jib, and right the helm aye." Sudden and startling as the unexpected orders were, they were executed as if by magic. The lieutenant, who had shouted from the bow, rushed astern and took the helm, and before any one had time to speculate upon the object of his maneuvers, he shouted again, "Look out! Sharp! Watch the sheets!" An involuntary cry broke forth from all on board. But it was no cry of terror. Right ahead was a narrow opening in the solid rock. It was hardly 40 feet wide. Whether it was a passage or not, it mattered little. It was at least a refuge, and, driven by wind and wave, the Dobryna, under the dexterous guidance of the lieutenant, dashed in between its perpendicular walls. Had she not immured herself in a perpetual prison? Chapter 13. A royal salute. "Then I take your bishop, Major," said Colonel Murphy, as he made a move that he had taken since the previous evening to consider. "I was afraid you would," replied Major Oliphant, looking intently at the chessboard. Such was the way in which a long silence was broken on the morning of the 17th of February by the old calendar. Another day elapsed before another move was made. It was a protracted game. It had, in fact, already lasted some months, the players being so deliberate, and so fearful of taking a step without the most mature consideration, that even now they were only making the 20th move. Both of them, moreover, were rigid disciples of the renowned Philidor, who pronounces that to play the pawns well is the soul of chess, and, accordingly, not one pawn had been sacrificed without a most vigorous defense. The men who were thus beguiling their leisure were 2 officers in the British Army, Colonel Heneage Finch Murphy and Major Sir John Temple Oliphant, remarkably similar in personal appearance. They were hardly less so in personal character. Both of them were about 40 years of age, both of them were tall and fair, with bushy whiskers and moustaches. Both of them were phlegmatic in temperament, and both much addicted to the wearing of their uniforms. They were proud of their nationality, and exhibited a manifest dislike, verging upon contempt, for everything foreign. Probably, they would have felt no surprise if they had been told that Anglo-Saxons were fashioned out of some specific clay, the properties of which surpassed their investigation of chemical analysis. Without any intentional disparagement, they might, in a certain way, be compared to 2 scarecrows which, though perfectly harmless in themselves, inspire some measure of respect, and are excellently adapted to protect the territory entrusted to their guardianship. English-like, the 2 officers had made themselves thoroughly at home in the station abroad in which it had been their lot to be quartered. The faculty of colonization seems to be indigenous to the native character, once let an Englishman plant his national standard on the surface of the moon, and it would not be long before a colony would be established around it. The officers had a servant, named Kirk, and a company of 10 soldiers of the line. This party of 13 men were apparently the sole survivors of an overwhelming catastrophe, which on the 1st of January had transformed an enormous rock garrisoned with well-nigh 2,000 troops, into an insignificant island far out to sea. But although the transformation had been so marvelous, it can not be said that either Colonel Murphy or Major Oliphant had made much demonstration of astonishment. "This is all very peculiar, Sir John," observed their colonel. "Yes, Colonel, very peculiar," replied the Major. "England will be sure to send for us," said one officer. "No doubt she will," answered the other. Accordingly, they came to the mutual resolution that they would stick to their post. To say the truth, it would have been a difficult matter for the gallant officers to do otherwise. They had but one small boat, therefore, it was well that they made a virtue of necessity, and resigned themselves to patient expectation of the British ship, which, in due time, would bring relief. They had no fear of starvation. Their island was mined with subterranean stores, more than ample for 13 men, nay, for 13 Englishmen. For the next 5 years at least. Preserved meat, ale, brandy, all were in abundance. Consequently, as the men expressed it, they were in this respect all right. Of course, the physical changes that had taken place had attracted the notice both of officers and men. But the reversed position of east and west, the diminution of the force of gravity, the altered rotation of the Earth, and her projection upon a new orbit, were all things that gave them little concern and no uneasiness, and when the colonel and the major had replaced the pieces on the board, which had been disturbed by the convulsion, any surprise they might have felt at the chessmen loss ing some portion of their weight was quite forgotten in the satisfaction of seeing them retain their equilibrium. One phenomenon, however, did not fail to make its due impression upon the men. This was the diminution in the length of day and night. 3 days after the catastrophe, Corporal Byrne, on behalf of himself and his comrades, solicited a formal interview with the officers. The request having been granted, Byrne, with the 9 soldiers, all punctilious wearing the regimental tunic of scarlet and trousers of invisible green, presented themselves at the door of the colonel's room, where he and his brother officer were continuing their game, raising his hand respectfully to his cap, which he wore poised jauntily over his right ear, and scarcely held on by the strap below his underlip. The corporal waited permission to speak. After a lingering survey of the chessboard, their colonel slowly lifted his eyes, and said with official dignity, "Well, men, what is it?" "First of all, sir," replied the corporal, "we want to speak to you about our pay, and then we wish 28 amazing stories to have a word with the major about our rations." "Say on, then," said Colonel Murphy. "What is it about your pay?" "Just this, sir. As the days are only half as long as they were, we should like to know whether our pay is to be diminished in proportion." The colonel was taken somewhat aback, and did not reply immediately, though by some significant nods towards the major, he indicated that he thought the question very reasonable. After a few moments' reflection, he replied, "It must, I think, be allowed that your pay was calculated from sunrise to sunrise. There was no specification of what the interval should be. Your pay will continue as before. England can afford it." A buzz of approval burst involuntarily from all the men, but military discipline and the respect due to their officers kept them in check from any boisterous demonstration of their satisfaction. "And now, Corporal, what is your business with me?" asked Major Oliphant. "We want to know whether, as the days are only 6 hours long, we are to have but 2 meals instead of 4? The officers looked at each other, and by their glances agreed that the corporal was a man of sound common sense. "Eccentricities of nature," said the major, "can not interfere with military regulations. It is true that there will be but an interval of an hour and a half between them, but the rule stands good, 4 meals a day. England is too rich to grudge her soldiers any of her soldiers' due. Yes, 4 meals a day." "Hurrah!" shouted the soldiers, unable this time to keep their delight within the bounds of military decorum, and, turning to the right about, they marched away, leaving the officers to renew the all-absorbing game. However confident everyone upon the island might profess to be that succor would be sent them from their native land, for Britain never abandons any of her sons, it could not be disguised that succor was somewhat tardy in making its appearance. Many and various were the conjectures to account for the delay. Perhaps England was then engrossed with domestic matters, or perhaps she was absorbed in diplomatic difficulties, or perchance, more likely than all, Northern Europe had received no tidings of the convulsion that had shattered their south. The whole party throve remarkably well up on the liberal provisions of the Commissariat Department, and if the officers failed to show the same tendency to embonpoint which was fast becoming characteristic of the men, it was only because they deemed it due to their rank to curtail any indulgences which might compromise the fit of their uniform. On the whole, time passed indifferently well. An Englishman rarely suffers from ennui, and then only in his own country, when required to conform to what he calls the humbug of society, and there 2 officers, with their similar tastes, ideas, and dispositions, got on together admirably. It is not to be questioned that they were deeply affected by a sense of regret for their lost comrades, and astounded beyond measure at finding themselves there sole survivors of a garrison of 1,895 men, but with true British pluck and self-control, they had done nothing more than draw up a report that 1883 names were missing from the muster roll. The island itself, the sole surviving fragment of an enormous pile of rock that had reared itself some 1,600 feet above the sea, was not, strictly speaking, the only land that was visible. For about 12 miles to the south there was another island, apparently the very counterpart of what was now occupied by the Englishmen. It was only natural that this should awaken some interest even in their most imperturbable minds, and there was no doubt that the 2 officers, during one of the rare intervals when they were not absorbed in their game, had decided that it would be desirable at least to ascertain whether the island was deserted, or whether it might not be occupied by some others, like themselves, survivors from the general catastrophe. Sir Dane, it is that one morning, when the weather was bright and calm, they had embarked alone in their little boat, and been absent for 7 or 8 hours. Not even to Corporal Pym did they communicate their object of their excursion, nor say one syllable as to its result, and it could only be inferred from their manner that they were quite satisfied with what they had seen, and very shortly afterwards Major Oliphant was observed to draw up a lengthy document, which was no sooner finished than it was formally signed and sealed with the seal of the 33rd Regiment. It was directed to the First Lord of the Admiralty, London, and kept in readiness for transmission by the first ship that should hail in sight. But time elapsed, and here was the 18th of February without an opportunity having been afforded for any communication with the British government. At breakfast that morning, the colonel observed to the major that he was under the most decided impression that the 18th of February was a royal anniversary, and he went on to say that, although he had received no definite instructions on the subject, he did not think that the peculiar circumstances under which they found themselves should prevent them from giving the day its due military. The major quite concurred, and it was mutually agreed that the occasion must be honoured by a bumper of port, and by a royal salute. Corporal Pym must be sent for. The corporal soon made his appearance, smacking his lips, having, by a ready intuition, found a pretext for a double morning ration of spirits. The 18th of February, you know, Pym, said their colonel, we must have a salute of 21 guns. Very good, replied Pym, a man of few words. And take care that your fellows don't get their arms and legs blown off, added the officer. Very good, sir, said the corporal, and he made his salute and withdrew. Of all the bombs, howitzers, and various species of artillery with which the fortress had been crowded, one solitary piece remained. This was a Browse muzzle-loader of 9-inch caliber, and, in default of the smaller ordnance generally employed for the purpose, had to be brought into requisition for the royal salute. A sufficient number of charges having been provided, the corporal brought his men to the redact off on a Comet 29, whence the gun's mouth projected over a sloping embrasure. The 2 officers, in cocked hats and full staff uniform, attended to take charge of their proceedings. The gun was maneuvered in strict accordance with the rules of the artilleryman's manual, and the firing commenced. Not unmindful of the warning he had received, the corporal was most careful between each discharge to see that every vestige of fire was extinguished, so as to prevent an untimely explosion, while the men were reloading, and accidents, such as so frequently mar public rejoicings, were all happily avoided. Much to the chagrin of both Colonel Murphy and Major Oliphant, the effect of the salute fell altogether short of their anticipations. The weight of the atmosphere was so reduced that there was comparatively little resistance to the explosive force of the gases, liberated at the cannon's mouth, and there was consequently none of the reverberation, like rolling thunder, that ordinarily follows the discharge of heavy artillery. 20 times had the gun been fired, and it was on the point of being loaded for the last time, when the colonel laid his hand upon the arm of the man who had the ramrod. Stop, he said, we will have a ball this time. Let us put the range of their piece to the test. A good idea, replied the major. "Corporal. You hear the orders." In quick time an artillery wagon was on the spot, and the men lifted out a full-sized shot, weighing 200 pounds, which, under ordinary circumstances, their cannon would carry about 4 miles. It was proposed, by means of telescopes, to note the place where the ball first touched the water, and thus to obtain an approximation sufficiently accurate as to the true range. Having been duly charged with powder and ball, the gun was raised to an angle of something under 45 degrees, so as to allow proper development to the curve that the projectile would make, and, at a signal from the major, the light was applied to the priming. "Heavens! By all that's good!" exclaimed both officers in one breath, as, standing open-mouthed, they hardly knew whether they were to believe their evidence of their own senses. Is it possible? The diminution of the force of attraction at their Earth's surface was so considerable that the ball had sped beyond the horizon. "Incredible!" ejaculated the colonel. "Incredible!" echoed the major. 6 miles at least," observed the one. More than that," replied the other. A while, they gazed at the sea and at each other in mute amazement. But in the midst of their perplexity, what sound was that which startled them? Was it mere fancy? Was it the reverberation of the cannon still booming in their ears? Or was it not truly the report of another and a distant gun? In answer to their own, attentively and eagerly, they listened. Twice, thrice did the sound repeat itself. It was quite distinct. There could be no mistake. "I told you so," cried the colonel, triumphantly. "I knew our country would not forsake us. It is an English ship, no doubt." In half an hour 2 masts were visible above their horizon. See, was I not right? Our country was sure to send to our relief. Here is the ship. "Yes," replied the major, "she responded to our gun." "It is to be hoped," muttered the corporal, "that our ball has done her no damage." Before long the hull was full in sight. A long trail of smoke betokened her to be a steamer, and very soon, by the aid of the glass, it could be as ascertained that she was a schooner yacht, and making straight for the island. A flag at her mast head fluttered in the breeze, and towards this their 2 officers, with the keenest attention, respectively, adjusted their glasses. Simultaneously the 2 telescopes were lowered. The colonel and the major stared at each other in blank astonishment. "Russian!" they gasped. And true it was that the flag that floated at their head of yonder mast was the Blue Cross of Russia. That was our show, and thank you all. Vid me thanks to Frater, sage and God.